Welcome to Season 5 of the Long-Winded One podcast. Listen as we showcase original work from top Royal Road authors read by professional voice actors. Hear interviews from your favorite lit RPG and game lit authors. Lastly, listen as the Long-Winded One tries his hand at his first ever lit RPG novel, The Four Treasures.
All right, well, welcome everybody to another edition of The Long-Winded One. With me tonight, I have an author from Royal Road who goes by the pen name Eleeyah. He said we could call him Charlie for the purposes of this interview. And we're going to hear his piece called Tinea and Leah. It's more than fan fiction at this point, but it started off as fan fiction. And we're going to hear this piece read by Christy Hodson. We're going to get a chance to ask Charlie some questions posed by his listeners and his readers from Discord. So the first question, Charlie, that I have for you is just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What led you to becoming a writer?
So I'm from Germany, around Bavaria, where it's currently just about the end of winter. What led me to writing was daydreams, I'd say, right? So I tend to read about 500 pages a day, and a lot of my time awake would be spent with just thinking about what I was reading and evaluating the thoughts that I got from the characters, and just experiencing the stories that I was reading. And one of the recurring themes was just gender dysphoria, strong wish to be a woman for many years. And eventually that pushed me to actually write a piece inside a already built and provided world, that's Stray Cat Strut by Ravensdagger. And that's how Tinea and Leah came to be.
And I'm not as familiar with Raven's Dagger as probably some of our listeners. Could you tell us a little bit about that world?
It's cyberpunk, and it has a lot of the horrific objectifying of humans, the use, the consumerism that you would expect from cyberpunk. But in a very Ravensdagger style, it's also cozy. You read, or the point of view are the eyes of a samurai or a vanguard, and these are people who've been chosen by alien super powerful AI, and they can kill what are called antitheses. These are invasive alien plant species, but they're ambulatory and very invasive. Like, they will take over a planet and destroy the ecosystem and consume literally all the biomass on it. And the samurai are basically have been selected for a variety of characteristics and traits by another species of super powerful aliens, and they get to make points by killing these plant-based aliens, the antithesis, and then they go and buy powerful gear with those points. And that's basically the bit about the SCS, or the Stray Cat Strut story, that's fun to read, unlike the usual sort of underlying anxiety you get from most cyberpunk stories.
You came to the world of lit RPG and game lit, it sounds like, through Raven's Dagger's writing. Do you want to tell us more about that? I remember reading something about a fan fiction contest. Is that right?
Yeah. Stray Cat Strut is probably Ravensdagger's most popular work, most successful work. And he decided last year in around, was it March, I think, to do a fan fiction contest for Stray Cat Strut. That was the point where I decided to put my daydreams and my thoughts and my wishes into actual words. And that's how Tinea and Leah started, as a submission for that fanfiction contest.
How did you do in that contest?
I did pretty well. I got second place by just 1 point behind the winner.
It looks like maybe in the notes for the question, you had something else you wanted to mention about Raven's Dagger.
One of the things that you usually see authors do is they start out on pages like Royal Road, and they release advanced chapters on Patreon, so people can sign up and give them a bit of a monthly stipend, and they get to earn a little bit of money, and then eventually they'll also take the work and publish it. It looks like I'm going to do something just slightly different, and that happened when I talked to Ravenstarker last, was it November roughly, about maybe publishing TNL and if it could be like an extended universe for Stray Cat Strut. And he actually really liked that idea. And there's no contract just yet. I still have to finish rewriting Tinea and Leah. But once that's done, and once I can kick the rewritten work to his editor, Ravenstarker will pay for it. And that's a big thing because an editor like that for like 200,000 words would cost me about $3,000. That's a bit much, but Ravenstarker is willing to pick that up. He's really interested in the actual health and support success of his fanfiction writers.
We know a little bit about how you came to the world of lit RPG, but what about Royal Road? Where in the world did you discover Royal Road?
So many years ago, I was reading on I call it r/hi-fi. So it's Humanity Fuck Yeah is basically the name of the Reddit. And it's stories about humans getting up to weird stuff and usually science fiction, or sometimes it's fantasy. But basically, that's where I started reading stories like Ralph's Bloodthorn's First Contact series, right? A very popular piece of work that's been sprawling itself all over various websites lately over the last few years. And that is literally how I found RR, because eventually he started out on hi-fi r/hi-fi and just posted there for I think 2 years, and people suggested look, there's this website Royal Roads, which is where all the other authors are, and it's actually quite successful and you'll get a lot more viewers there, which he certainly did. And I just followed along and I found that Royal Road is actually pretty comfortable to read on. Then I just kept reading on that site for a while before I started writing myself.
So what do you find yourself reading now?
Aside from Ravenstarker stuff, of course, my favorite work is probably Beneath the Dragon Eye Moons by Selkie. There's also Unintended Cultivator.
How would you say that your experience on Royal Road as a writer has been?
Royal Road is, in my experience, pretty much the best website to be publishing from if you look at the tools they have, like it's easy to publish on Royal Road. You have a lot of analytics and stuff like that. It's also big compared to any other reading website, at least in the West. So it's all around just the place to go if you want to publish something, along with a few secondary websites like ScribbleHub. As far as the readers go, it's just a complete mixed bag. You get some really, really, really awesome readers, and you get some real asshats too. Authors say that it's very centric around, very focused around lit RPG and, male protagonists being badass and stuff like that, which kind of is true. But honestly, it's big enough that even the slightly less popular genres have plenty of chance.
It looks like all of your scores overall, the style, the story, grammar, character, I mean, they're all close to 5 stars. And you have, over 500,000 views, over 1,000 followers. So I would say your experience has been pretty good so far.
Yeah, it's also frustrating because you have the numbers. So you can see the number not move, or you can see the number go way up and then go way down. So it's kind of a double-edged sword having so many analytic tools. But yes, I would say that I'm doing good, especially considering that I'm writing what is essentially a trans story, right? And it has a gender bender tag, which is either loved or hated. There seems to be no middle ground with readers there. So it's certainly not mainstream in some respects. And yet I would consider myself fairly successful in a small way.
You've been on Royal Road for a little over a year now, and with a very successful piece of fan fiction turned unique literature, there's probably people listening to this who would say, I wish I could do that. Could you give those people some advice?
Yeah, so this is where you've caught me at a really interesting time. I've been writing for just barely a little more than a year, which means I've kind of had time to settle into a style and figure out a couple mistakes. And interestingly, I've also recently helped a friend of mine edit their first story, and there was a piece of advice that I had to think through and develop for them that might really help some writers, I figure.
Please tell.
Yeah, so a lot of the stories that you'll see on Royal Roads have kind of militaristic characters, right? So soldiers, mercenaries, anti-heroes maybe, that kind of thing. People who are kind of stoic. And if you're new as a writer, you may not really know how to write that properly, right? And you make the mistake of thinking that you have to confront the reader with the stoicism and the abrasiveness or the militaristic manner. But it's not actually the reader that you have to confront, it's the people around the character, the other people in the story, right? The other characters. And the reader still needs the view into the mind and into the emotions and the thoughts of your character. Otherwise, instead of the character appearing a little bit abrasive or stoic or militaristic, they'll just appear wooden. And that's something that you want to avoid. So that's my big piece of advice. Don't confront the reader with your character's traits. Confront the people around the character.
What else do you have for us? What other kinds of advice?
You can't please everyone. You will get readers who just do not like your decisions. And you'll get readers who absolutely love them at the same time. And it can be disheartening to have somebody just tear into your character's decisions or whatever. And maybe there is some to it sometimes, right? Maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe you weren't writing what you thought you were writing, but maybe it's just personal preference, right? And you can't please everybody.
That is true.
The last one is don't sleep on good grammar. So one of the really popular and common pieces of advice around is not to give too much of a crap about how you write, as long as you get certain commas right. Like you don't want to say let's eat let's eat grandma, but you want to say let's eat grandma, right? I call it the psycho's comma. So obviously that one you can't get wrong. But a lot of writers say that every other type of punctuation or word choice or grammatical choice or something like that is not that important. But I personally say that's a trap. I figured that if you can get your narration close to impeccable English, then you have a lot of space to get individualistic with your character voices, with the thoughts of certain characters. You just have space to be more creative if your English is and your grammar is good. But that's my personal advice.
All right. Well, here's the moment that I'm really excited for. These are the questions from your readers.
These are readers from my Discord, and I put the interview questions from you to them. And some of them got very excited to ask questions that weren't already on the list.
I'm really interested, especially in this first question. It says, how much actual research do you end up doing for your technical descriptions, if at all? What topics have you found most interesting in researching?
I do research when I feel that a technical description is close enough to real life that there'll be people who have contact with whatever I'm writing about in real life in some version, right? Let's say ammunition, let's say guns, let's say some kind of ordnance that already in some lesser form exist in real life, and there'll be professionals who will be reading my story, and I'll be able to engage them if I make sure that my technical description is based on something in real life and then just taken to an extreme that makes sense in the context of the story itself. In that case, I'll usually be Googling and I'll be asking ChatGPT questions for, let's say there's just one description and I want to figure out what's the correct caliber for a bullet or whatever. That'll probably be 15 minutes of researching and then cross-checking if ChatGPT is lying to me or not. And then I'll continue writing. And that's basically how my technical descriptions are researched usually. So basis in reality and then modified for context. I had the most fun researching biological stuff, actually. The stuff that Tinea, my character, my main character or my protagonist gets and uses. There's a lot of biological knowledge that I needed. And I basically spent hours just reading up on a variety of stuff regarding insects, regarding human biology, regarding proteins and enzymes. That was the most fun.
I think this question leads us directly to another question that's similar. So the question is, do you often get pushback on real world terminology? For example, mag versus clip, etc. This I think relates to your researching.
I don't get very much pushback. Mostly, actually, I don't get any pushback at all. What I get is additional information occasionally. So, did you know, for example, that at least in at least one military, any warhead or any shell above 20 millimeters is called a grenade? Stuff like that, like just random information that I didn't know, but that I can use to make the world or the character, the voice of my character come more alive in a future chapter. So that's the kind of stuff I'll get every now and then, but I don't actually get a lot of pushback. And I think that's because I'm careful to use the right terms. Like I will always research terms before I use them, right?
I think that's a good policy. All right, well, let's go to the next question. Considering that your work is technically fan fiction, how much work have you done with the creator of this world, Ravensdagger?
So indeed, Tinea and Leah is very much still fan fiction, even if it's also becoming more. And I have been talking to Ravensdagger for pretty much the entirety of its writing process. So for the last year, I would ask questions about certain things like how points work, things like that. Although I should mention that Ravensdagger is fairly hands off and he wants us to just have fun with it. I'm more concerned about Tinea and Leah being close to canon than he is.
Is it possible to read your story without reading Stray Cat Strut first?
Oh, yeah, definitely. All the information that you need about the universe is in Tinea and Leah. There are, like, the closest connection between the two stories currently are a few cameos where you'd recognize the situation that Cat was in, that Tinea can see on a kind of replay, for example. So you get something out of having read Stray Cat Strut first, but it's not necessary to enjoy the world or understand the world.
Outside of this particular story, do you have plans to write another piece of fan fiction or possibly an original story of your own?
Absolutely. I'm currently brainstorming and have been brainstorming for about half a year a different story that I call In Dreams I Could Fly, and that'll be an original. It'll be a bit of a space age mystique. Let's say there's space magic involved, and it doesn't exist yet. I haven't started writing it yet, but I have been gathering ideas, and there's some really neat stuff in there. I'll probably start writing it in about half a year, I guess.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to design your protagonists' themes after a moth and a spider, respectively?
Tinea and Leah is basically one big project of discovery writing. And while I was writing the chapters of Aiden, so that's who Tinea starts out as, right? In the first, I'd say 15 or 16 chapters, Tinea isn't Tinea yet. She's still Aiden. And while I was writing him, uh, designing his future body, that's basically when I got a close idea of what I wanted Tinia to look like, what kind of augmentations I wanted her to have. That's how I came to landed on a fluffy, beautiful moth theme.
Do you have a personal favorite character in your story besides the main duo?
Yep, that's definitely Andy, a little 4-year-old kid who's rather quiet and very observant and just incredibly cute and adorable. She's an orphan, yeah, and she is funny, but not intentionally. She is funny because you're an adult and she's a little kid,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're basically seeing her thoughts and experiencing her thoughts and what goes through her head, and it's just an enormous amount of sugar and adorableness.
We have a question here that says, recently you've been rewriting the early chapters of your story. What was your motivation behind this, and are you happy with the rewrites that you've done?
The motivation is essentially just to bring up the first half or the first 2/3 even of the story to my recent standard. Like I started writing about a year ago. Those were rough times. Yes, okay, I've seen worse starts than mine, but I wouldn't say it was very good either. And it is night and day compared to how I am able to write these days. Right, my current style is actually something that I'm proud of, and I'm not proud of those early attempts. And my goal with the rewrite is not to change the plot itself. That's too much work. I don't think that's a smart thing to invest a lot of my time into. But what I want to do is carry the style forward into the early chapters that I currently have.
Do you think a year from now you'll feel the same way about what you're writing now?
Probably yes, which is why I've set myself the rule of never do more than one rewrite.
The next question is, do you have any expectations on how your story would be received, considering the hot topic gender politics? Were you surprised by the reception you did receive?
I was a bit worried, yeah. So usually when somebody sees the trans flag or the gender bender flag tag or whatever for a story, they come in with preconceptions. They have a picture of what that's going to be like. And Tinea and Leah is not what you would consider typical for either of those tags. It's not a trans story as you probably would expect it. Like, there is not a lot of the angst around gender dysphoria. What was really important to me is to give the reader an understanding of issues, how they are actually in real life. And when you have gender dysphoria, like, yeah, it sucks. It'll make you cry, but also there's daily life and it'll distract you. And I was worried that people would come in with preconceptions and either be disappointed or they'll just come in, troll me, give the story 0.5 stars without even reading the first chapter, which definitely happens, by the way. So I have, I'm sadly subject to those kind of trolls. And that's just comes with the territory. I wasn't surprised by that, but I was worried it would happen, and it actually did happen. So, well, there you go.
That surprises me in a science fiction story that people would come in with these preconceived notions.
Yeah, well, that's the hot topic, gender politics, right? They'll come in and they'll think it's about they will think that I'm coming with the intent to carry real world politics as an agenda into a story, and I definitely am not, right? So I've had people, one memorable example especially, where one guy who's 60 years old and does not have a bone of what did they say? Not a bit of gender dysphoria in their bones, I think they said, right? And they told me this was so relatable. And that's what I wanted. They were able to relate to the gender dysphoria and to Tinea and to Aiden in a way that people who just don't have contact with that can understand. That's what I wanted to accomplish. And I was worried that people wouldn't see that and would be surprised by it. Like, trans people would expect something that caters specifically to them, and everybody else would be pushed away by there being anything trans at all, because that's a hot topic in gender politics, and activists everywhere being annoying.
That's a tough question to segue from, but this next question I think we're going to end. This is the last of your fan questions. I'm excited for this question because I would imagine that the language of this question is based on some of the language that you use in your story. You can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, but the question is, who's the bestest boy / girl?
So the bestest girl is definitely Andy, and the bestest boy is definitely Sam. Andy is the 4-year-old, the quiet one that I mentioned earlier, the incredibly cute one. And Sam is 6 years old and has a girlfriend who's also 6-year-old, and they're both colorblind, but they're colorblind in opposite spectrums, so they help each other a lot, and they're basically attached at the hip, and they're also very cute. The question is kind of random, but I would say Andy's the best girl and Sam's the best boy.
On that note, I would love it if you could set up the chapter that we're going to hear from Christy.
So we'll be hearing about Leah, and specifically it'll be the first chapter where I introduce Leah. And Leah is the second protagonist, and we'll be experiencing her moment of being selected to become a samurai.
Charlie, if people aren't already following you, where can they find you online?
Well, mostly really it's just Royal Road. I don't really have a lot of social media. I kind of stay away from that stuff. I do have a Ko-fi. The link is in my page, in my Royal Roads profile, as well as on most chapters, and that's basically it, really.
Well, thank you. We'll include the link to all of those in the description if people want to find you and find your stories. And Charlie, we thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us down this Lit RPG deep dive. Please consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts and visit us over at longwinded.one, where you can see past episodes and find all of our socials. even our new Discord server. We hope you enjoy.